Well, this one's a serious one because I've taken my sunglasses off and I've kind of sobered up a little bit for this interview. I've been lucky enough to interview a few pretty interesting people in the industry, but this one's something special indeed. And I'm not even going to bother to do an intro for this guy because his name speaks for itself. It's Russell Crowe, man, and he's right here talking to me. Thank you very much for giving me a little bit of your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, man. Good morning. How are you? Oh, it's morning for me. Where are you? What part of the world are you in?
Yeah, I'm in Scotland, so it's
Oh,
like
cool.
midnight here on a rainy April night. So
Okay.
yeah, that's great, man.
Cool, man.
Um, honestly, like with interviews like this, I never quite know where to start. But like when it's an Australian actor who kind of started Australia, New Zealand, I always check were they in Neighbours and or Home and Away, and yeah, you were. So that's great. It's always a good start.
Well, it's funny actually because that TV show they always put me on their list of alumni neighbours, But the reality break for that man is I was in Melbourne. I was doing a season of the Rocky Horror Show. It's actually a national tour. That's what I did at that stage most of the time. I either worked in bands or I did musical theatre. And the casting director for Neighbours came to the show and she talked to me backstage and, would you like to do a little role, So, as a joke, I said sort of, how much or whatever. And she told me, and it was like, I was doing 8 shows a week at the time. And the fee for doing a day and a half on Neighbours was like 3 or 4 times my weekly wage. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. And then they sent me the script. And I sort of thought about it and I thought, oh, do I really want to connect myself with this show? But in the script, there was a fight sequence, right, where I was fighting with Craig McLachlan while Jason Donovan was trying to break us up. And Kylie Minogue was to jump on my back and try and split us apart. So I thought, well, if this is the biggest gig I ever get on TV, then cool. I mean, at least it's something to show the grandkids, There's your old man, grandfather there with Kylie Minogue, whatever. So I said yes to it. And it was literally like a day and a half's work. But in a day and a half on their sort of schedule, it was a couple of episodes, So, but it's funny how, for me at the time, it was just a nothing. But they keep insisting that it was that day and a half on Neighbours that brought about my my subsequent career.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, some like so many actors did get their start in Neighbours, like Guy Pearce, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's when I first met Guy, and then a few years later, or let's see, that would have been '87. I did that thing on Neighbours, and basically a decade, or nearly a decade later, I was having a conversation with Curtis Hanson, and he brought Guy's name up, and I was able to tell Curtis a couple of stories that really focused in on Guy's abilities and his level of concentration and stuff, and so he got that gig. But yeah, for a lot of young actors, having that thing of turning up every day and honing your craft on a soap, you really can't get a better training ground, because it's one thing to come up through theatre and stuff like that. But if you want to work on camera and learning about how things are shot and, the limitations of your movements and all that sort of stuff. And, I think, there's such a long line now of people who are alumni from those two soaps, which is obviously what you're getting at, And more recently, of course, Chris Hemsworth and Margot Robbie coming out of Home and Away. Yeah, so undeniable, but just it's the same in England, as people get involved in those longer TV shows. If they're there to learn for X amount of time, then it's a great school, But if you sit there for 20 years and that's your only acting job, then it's something else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is guys like they spend their whole career just doing that role, and it's just like it's a good payday. But
Yeah.
yeah, obviously you moved on to the much bigger
But I
things.
do I do know the reasonings behind that, man, because like I'll walk off a film set. I've wrapped the last shot. I'm 58 now. I've been in the business since I was a 6-year-old, and it takes literally 2 hours before a little voice in the back of my head says, "Will you ever work again?" And that's
Yeah,
that working class kid, who saw the acting thing as such a privilege. So I do understand that, because it's so, I mean, there's 98% of all people who call themselves an actor are unemployed at any given point. So I do understand why somebody would make that choice, because it's, if you're an actor, it's better to be working than not, because when you're not working, what really are you?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I can totally get it. But obviously you were very, you know, fortunate that you moved on to much bigger things. And honestly, like there's a million movies I could ask you about in your career. I guess the one that always stuck in my mind, I wish that it led to like sequels and so on, was Master and Commander.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was such an interesting movie, and such almost like a bit of a throwback to a different decade of filmmaking, where it was these historical epics, like this very naval oriented story. I remember watching it with my dad and just absolutely loving it back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a shame that there wasn't they didn't get a chance to do sequels to that.
Well, I think the studio kind of they sort of, that was a bit of an own goal from them, man. Because when for a start, when the movie was in post production, the post went on a lot longer than it was supposed to. And possibly if they had thrown some more resources at it, they could have accelerated it. So we missed our first release date, which then ended up meaning we came out after Pirates of the Caribbean. And we had wrapped before Pirates of the Caribbean even started shooting, so that indicates just how long our post was. And it was like that funny thing is like people have seen a movie with big boats in it and laughed all the way through it. So now is not the time to put them back in that situation and say, now take this seriously,
Yeah.
But also, when it was coming out, and I can be critical of the studio about this because it's just, my perspective. But, when it was coming out, they were sort of pushing it like it was Maximus on the high seas, But if you went into that film looking for an action movie, you'd be greatly disappointed. Now, there are some incredible action sequences, but it's not the rhythm of an action film. It's actually the rhythm of an art film, and everything is given due consideration and weight. And one of the things that interested Peter Weir, the director, who's a magnificent filmmaker, one of the things that interested him is the society, the life, the connection between the men and the officers and the Marines, and how things, happen on a daily basis, and how the captain sort of keeps his balance, and the music that the captain and the doctor play. I mean, it's such a rich world on board that ship. So it was $150 million art film. Now, if they'd come out and supported that, I think, because it did get 10 Academy Award nominations, so it's not like it got ignored. It was very much respected for what it was, but it just didn't get the box office, and therefore the sort of bums on seats, But I think if they'd, believed in what that art, they asked one of the great art film directors of the world to take it on, and then kind of pretended that he'd suddenly turned into an action film maker, So I just think that was an imbalance between the sell, because if you're a young 20-year-old bloke and you go to that movie on the first weekend looking for an action film, you're going to be unsatisfied, and that's what you're going to talk about. But if you are a fan of art films, or films that take a deeper dive into it, you would have gone to that film and been very satisfied. However, that person was turned off by the way the film was marketed. Took a long time to find its audience.
For me, it was such an interesting character study, that film, like the different perspectives on how the world should be and stuff. You have the captain and the doctor. The captain's very much like men must be governed, even if it means harsh discipline. The doctor is much more of a humanitarian, and it's great because like you get both perspectives in the course of the movie. It's such an interesting thing, and it's all woven into this not action oriented, but like this big historical adventure, So yeah, like you say, it's a shame that it came out around about the same time as the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, because had they not been there, giving you like all that stuff, but like amped up to 11, I think it would have done so much better, And it's a shame,
Yeah, it probably should have come out earlier in the year and hit its original release date. But, part of the levels of perfection in that film are why it didn't come out on its original release date. Peter was obsessive about things, and that's the reason that people fall so in love with it. Even people that have done a lot of sailing, they watch the film and they have in the back of their mind, all right, if they're going around that cape, then, the water is this color, and they wait and they get to that moment and they go, holy shit, that's how the water looks there. And what Peter had done is he'd sent a film crew on a boat anywhere we were supposed to be shooting, because we shot mainly in off the coast of Mexico, but the crew also did some shooting in the Galapagos. But they went and shot the Horn. They went and shot the places that the boat said it was in. So when somebody's looking off the boat to the water, that water is the color of the place, because he had the footage. But it was that level of obsession, like I said, that creates that type of movie that has the legs that it's obviously had now. And there was an article recently, just a little while ago, in GQ, asking the question, why are so many 30-year-olds obsessed with Master and Commander? So and there's a lot of reasons. One of the things that they said in the article was that they believe, because everybody on board the boat, and it's a very masculine situation on board that boat, but everybody has a job. Everybody's on this adventure together. They're all willing to work as a unit. They're all willing to be led by this one guy. In fact, they love that guy, and they want to do their very best for that guy. And they're at the end of their exploration of it is like, is this because this is masculinity without the toxicity? This is masculinity in a very sort of, in an almost pure way, where there is a job to be done, and we're all going to do it, and we're facing great danger, and blah, 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 all those cool things, all those sort of boys on adventure things.
That's the thing that we seem to be missing so much nowadays in cinema, is like this idea that you can have like strong masculine role models, and they don't have to be these overbearing, toxic arseholes. They can be just strong and capable and competent and good at what they do, and something to aspire to. But it's like, so many films seem to shy away from that now, and I don't really understand why that's happened. But it's frustrating, because, like you say, that's why guys are gravitating to these older movies that are giving them that.
The interesting thing with Master and Commander, it might not be exactly equal, but there's definitely a balance between male and female. So it's not just that young men are reaching for it; it's girls in their 30s are watching it as well. It's sort of, it's very interesting. But yeah, we do seem to emphasize the faults in our heroes. But I suppose that cynicism has grown. So many times we're told somebody is a righteous person or whatever, and then X amount of time goes by and you realize that person was involved in some very strange things. It's sort of like, I think, quite often we tend to pick the wrong heroes in a public forum.
Yeah, no, I agree. But yeah, I mean, the one other movie I wanted to ask about just briefly was Cinderella Man. It's a movie that always stuck in my head in your filmography, because Jimmy Braddock was such an inspiring character and a real person, to boot. A guy who went from the top of his game to like the midst of the depression. A guy who was like quite literally penniless, and he's forced to go cap in hand around his former friends, asking for money, only to like rise up again. Like, it just such a great, inspiring film. It was like Rocky for a different generation, and yeah, I just wondered, like, what did you take from that film, like, as an actor?
Well, that was a very, very difficult movie for me to make. I've since done another film that was physically harder, which is unbelievable. But at the time, Cinderella Man was a very, very physical and difficult movie. I got 12 what they call minor concussions through the course of the shooting of that movie. Subluxated my left shoulder, had an operation on it, did 21 days of rehab, and was back in the ring doing 10 3-minute rounds on the 21st day. which I still pay for that now. You know, I have a massive arthritic shoulder that I have to work around all the time. And it seems pretty silly to have done that on behalf of a movie, but I'm that sort of silly person. You know, I love my job, and I just sort of, you know, and I leap into it and damn the torpedoes, you know. But as with a lot of these jobs where I've played a real person, you know, I delve into the person. Sometimes you learn stuff which makes you wary or cautious or whatever, but you know, other times you sort of fall in love with that character, and I really did with Braddock. You know, every story I heard from relatives or friends or whatever, I just, you know, respected him and liked him even more. And as you say, his personal journey, you know, it wasn't that he did anything wrong. I mean, a lot of the time you have these stories in sports, boxing in particular, you know, where the person gets a little bit of success and then they're so excessive that they, you know, burn their own house down kind of thing, you know. But he wasn't that guy. You know, he invested the majority of what he earned in shares and bonds. And his other big investment was a taxi company in Manhattan. Now, that's a solid gold investment, right?
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
along comes the Wall Street crash of 1929, and his entire share portfolio just disappeared. He didn't do anything to make that happen. It just disappeared. And then his other principal investment is a taxi company. In the Depression, man, the first few years, nobody's taking cabs. People are walking, you know, or they're catching, you know, train maybe, but not cabs. You know, that was an expensive thing at that point. So, you know, at the end of his career physically, when he's already breaking down, now he loses everything, and you know, he's got kids and he's got a wife, and you know, he'd been damaged. You know, he'd broken his hand many years ago, and that injury was still there. You know, so you know, the mythology of Braddock was because he started working on the docks and unloading the boats and, you know, carrying things and stuff, he actually did a version of physical rehab on his hand and re-strengthened it, you know. Yeah, I always loved that story, man. And it's you know, it still sort of makes me stand and look at it and go, wow, that's a true story. That actually happened in that guy's life, you know. There was a beautiful story I got told where Braddock was driving his wife and his kids across one of the bridges into Manhattan. And it was the 4th of July weekend. And the kids are making noise and the wife's trying to calm them down. And then somebody drove past him and cut him off, you know, and yelled something out as he did, you know, some sort of abuse. And his wife, you know, she's like, what did he say, Jimmy? And she's whining down the window, like, catch up to him, you know. What did he say? What did he say? And this is the nature of the man, you know. He just said, Happy July 4th, baby. That's all he said. You know, just calm the situation down, get back on with the big day for the family. You know, you know, those little stories like that just made me feel very warm towards him and made me really deeply want to do something that would honor him and honor his experience and his story.
No, I think you absolutely nailed it with that movie
Cheers,
because, yeah, man, like I say, it still sticks with me now. It just
And
seems
Paul
like a
Giamatti's performance in that film too, you know, and Renee Zellweger, of
oh,
course.
you and him together.
Yeah, man. It's like from my perspective as an actor, you know, you don't always come up against a co-star that you're working with that level of skill, but when you do, it's just thrilling, man. You know, and doing the little things that we would do together, and the information that we could stack into a scene just because he was like on fire and, you know, able to communicate without words. You know, it was magnificent. It was a great deal of fun.
No, it was a great movie. But yeah, you've got a new one coming out, I guess, in the next couple of weeks. I've seen the trailer for the Pope's Exorcist, and it looks pretty interesting. It looks like a kind of like horror hybrid with a bit of action and a bit of like psychological thriller mixed in. It's a little bit of everything. The character that you're playing is a real guy who's apparently done like tens of thousands of exorcisms. Like, it's crazy. And the way the trailer presents it, It's an interesting one because it's almost like he's like a maverick detective or something. Like if this was a cop drama, he'd be like this maverick detective that's been on the force for a long time, and he does things his way. But instead of like going for criminals, like he's doing like demon exorcisms and stuff, and it
Well,
just yeah,
it's
it looks
very
pretty
much
good.
a genre film, and then in that it's a a horror movie and has visually all those sort of elements. But as you say, it touches on a lot of other things. It's got a little bit of Da Vinci Code in it. It's got a little touch of Indiana Jones in it. One person described Gabriele Amorth, who is, as you said, a real man, as the James Bond of exorcists. But there's
That's a hell of a
also
title to claim, man.
there's also probably unexpectedly a significant amount of humor. Looking through the real life of Gabriele Amorth, it became very clear to me that there was two things at play really when you boiled it down. He had this unshakable faith, this purity of his faith and his belief. And then next to that, he also had this sense of humor. So he's dealing with people who are afflicted and the families of the afflicted person, and taking families through some very, very dark times, possibly the darkest times they'll ever experience. And he's the man who's supposed to, reach into that afflicted person and bring them some sort of solace and comfort, and potentially bring them to the light. So you imagine, 36 years of that would be a punishing job, But if you're looking for a sword and shield to help you do that job and keep your own balance, having an unshakable belief, an unshakable faith, and a purity in your faith, combined with a sense of humor, those are probably pretty good things to, keep your defenses up when you're doing a job like that.
Yeah, I think sense of humor in particular, goddamn, you're going to need that if you're going to be doing that kind of job. Like
Absolutely, yeah.
it's going to take it out of you.
But he had a really interesting history, Amorth, and that's what grabbed me. I wasn't necessarily looking to be involved in a horror film. It's not something I go and seek out myself. I like to sleep deeply at night. But his history, he came from Modena in Italy, and when he was 17, he believed that he'd received a calling from God. So he traveled to Rome to talk to the head priest at the Paulists and say, look, I've received a calling. And that guy said, look, kid, you're 17, go away. You come back later when you've experienced some stuff, So he was a bit sort of let down by that, I suppose. But he goes back to Modena. It's 1942. War is raging, and he finds himself caught up in it, So he joins the resistance, and he fights as a partisan against the fascists. This is a young kid who had experienced a calling from God to serve God, and now he finds himself with a gun in his hand and he's shooting to kill, trying to save his own ass. He goes through that experience, comes out of his war years, and actually goes into law school, completes his law degree, starts working as a journalist, but he still feels he has that calling. So he goes back to Rome, goes back to that same father, and the father then says, perfect, you've lived life. You know what to say to people when they're in their darkest moments. So, then he goes to theology school. So he goes to theology school, comes out of that, and because he's with the Paulus, which is all about communication, he starts working as a journalist. He produces radio, he produces television, he writes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles for interfaith magazines. And it's not till he's 60 years old he gets a tap on the shoulder by this guy, Father Candido, who I believe he barely knew. And Father Candido says, Gabriele, you're chosen to take over my job. And that job was being chief exorcist for the Vatican. So for the last 36 years of his life, that's what he did. But because of his earlier experiences and his work as a journalist, he documented everything. There's 12 books, man. There's 12 books of his first-person experiences that he wrote and published, and that's available to me as the actor. So that was like a treasure chest. It was like, this is fantastic. I've taken a lot of liberties with him, possibly more than any time I've ever played a real man. But there were things that were said to me that, I couldn't find any actual empirical evidence of, right? But if his colleagues keep talking about his sense of humor. If his colleagues talk about the way he would approach things, then I had to sort of like, I just had to take it on, on faith myself that they were saying those things because that was their experience of him. So, you know, I have him riding a motor scooter, for example, which was something that I really insisted about with the producer and the director. It's like, if he lives in Rome, it's just the most practical way to get around. And I was there doing interviews, with people from the Vatican and meetings set up by people through the Vatican of his friends, of his colleagues, of a man who did 160 exorcisms with him, for example. And every now and then I'd see a priest zoom past on a Lambretta or a Vespa, and I'm like, that's a look. I want to go with that look, So,
and even to this day, you still see them everywhere in Rome. Like, I've seen it myself. Like, I was there a few years ago, and yeah, they're there,
Yeah, so I said, well, why not use that? Why not use that? And it's a funny thing, because there was some resistance to the idea at first, but every time we put an image on social media of this priest, Father Gabriele Amort, driving his Vespa through the streets of Rome in his cassock with his robes flying, it gets a massive response. So it seems like, there is an audience for a priest on a Lambretta. So we shall see. But, it is definitely a horror movie. So if you're not into that, be aware of that. It is going to be a little bit scary. But there's a lot of other things going on in this movie, so it's not just a horror film.
Yeah. No, it sounds interesting, and damn, I'm going to go watch it. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. And look, I'm very aware that like I've kept a lot of your time already, and we're pretty much out now. But I just want to say, man, thank you very much for doing this. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you tonight, and I very much appreciate it. And
Cheers,
I wish
man.
you the best
Good
of
on
luck
you.
with the Pope's Exorcist.
Thank you very much, man. Nice talking to you. All the best.
Thank you.